All right, so this here is our last technique that we're going to do, and it's the one technique that we're going to do in this class that doesn't require a stencil. What we're actually going to do is use a stamp. So we're going to stamp the image, and then we're going to use the texture paste to give some dimension to the image. We are going to lose some of the detail, like I ignored some of those smaller petals. This works best when you have a larger image because you need somewhere for that palette knife to be able to work. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stamp my image, and I'm stamping it in blue because I want a color that is dark enough that I can see through it when I'm using my texture paste, but I also want it light enough that when I go to paint with acrylic paint, it's going to completely cover it. So let's put the stamp over to the side. And then I'm using my smaller palette knife for this just to have a little bit more control. And then the other thing I have here is an inexpensive brush. It's really hard to get into those points of the poinsettia with the palette knife, so I'm going to use my brush for that. And like I said, this is going to be painted with acrylic paint when we're done. So pretty much the acrylic paint is pretty opaque, so it's going to be very forgiving with your lines. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a bit of a ridge on the outside of the petal, and then I'm smoothing it off towards the inside. And whenever I take excess off, I put it right back into the jar. This is the only one of the techniques where I'm using, or I'm having the jar open for a period of time. I want to get a bit of a dollop in there so that I have something to be able to pull out with my brush. And it doesn't need to go all the way out, but I do want to have a little bit of paste towards the end of that petal there. And this works more for images that have a bigger open surface. This wouldn't work for something that's really tiny. And all the techniques that we're doing in this class, I do them on cards because I tend to work on cards more often simply because it's a smaller surface, a smaller area, but you have a completed project within a fairly short period of time. But you could absolutely use these in mixed media projects. You could use them in art journals, that sort of thing. This particular one I think would be really, really cool on a canvas. Adding some extra texture to whatever image you're using. And then you could do it in a larger format as well. I seem to be picking that up instead of putting it down, so I'm just going to take my palette knife and go back over there. And I work from the outside in, so I'm doing all the bigger outside petals, and then I'll do a few of the bigger inside ones, and then I leave the smaller ones, because when it's painted, you see so much texture that adds some detail to it anyways, that I don't find you lose anything by losing some small petals. This is one of those ones where it takes a little bit to kind of get used to how to position the palette knife, how to get a ridge where you want it. And like I said, I tend to try to get ridges towards the outside of the petals, almost as if the petals were curling a little bit. But I don't get too caught up with being perfect with the details, because my paint will be that, or will help it be a little bit more forgiving for me. And this is another one where you definitely need some newer, fresher technique or fresher paste. You don't want to have paste with lumps in it, because otherwise you're not going to get a smoother ridge on your petals there. almost like icing a cake, except you're creating flowers. So I'm just going to leave it as is right now. When it comes to the center, I just take a little bit on my palette knife, and I just give it a little bit of texture in the center. We're gonna use some, what color is it? Tarnished Brass metallic. So that's gonna highlight the center anyways, but I don't worry about getting all those little tiny bumps or whatever in there. I just put some texture in there. So this has to completely dry before you can paint it. You can't paint wet paste, so through the magic